The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
This episode is brought to you by GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. Get the most out of your vehicle with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco original equipment. The only parts designed, engineered, tested, and backed by General Motors. You can find your perfect fit for most makes and models and choose from 3 tiers of parts, including GM OE or gold and silver aftermarket parts. Visit gmparts.com for more information.
Have you heard of Olivia, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ+ women? You know what they say. Life is short and the world is wide. And when you're a lesbian or LGBTQ+ woman, you want to be able to go on vacation, have some fun, and be yourself. Olivia Travel creates full takeovers of their cruise, resort, riverboat, and adventure vacations, so you can relax and be completely yourself. Olivia also provides the entertainment, bringing comedians and musicians from within our community. Traveling by yourself? No problem. Olivia has a robust solos program so you can travel independently, together. Single, coupled, or in a group, you'll meet amazing LGBTQ+ women who come from all walks of life yet have so much in common. Join the thousands of Olivians who travel to bucket list destinations all over the world. It's life-changing to be in the majority on your own vacation. Discover Olivia for yourself at olivia.com today. Welcome back to Cruising. This is Sarah Gabrielli, and I have such a cool story to share with you this week. This is the story of the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, as told by Sue Say, an activist and radical who lived there in the early 80s. Greenham was an anti-nuke encampment outside of a U.S. military base in England, occupied by women, many of them lesbians, from 1981 all the way through 2000. Sue lived at Greenham for 2 years amongst hundreds of other radical women. I feel like she paints a pretty clear picture of Greenham herself and the political situation at the time, so I'll leave a lot of those details to her. But probably the most significant thing to know is that the Greenham women were successful. They put so much unwavering, nonviolent pressure on the government and the military base from so many different angles for so many years. By the 90s, we had a nuclear arms treaty between the US and the Soviet Union, and all of the missiles had been removed from the UK, which was their initial goal. Obviously, there were a lot of factors involved in this, but considering Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, explicitly thanked the Greenham women for their part in making the INF treaty possible, they had an impact. And I'm very excited for Sue to tell you all about it.
When I was very young, America and Russia were at such odds with each other that we really believed genuinely that there would be a nuclear war. And my parents were very much in the peace movement. And so for me to go to rallies and things was one thing. But I think I just got to that point where I felt that I needed to do something more. And Greenham Commons Women's Peace Camp was basically, it was a military base that had been set up on common land in Newbury in Berkshire. And the Americans and the British were working together to bring cruise missiles to that base. And I went to live there in what had started off as a walk, mostly by women, from Cardiff to Newbury. And when they'd got there, they didn't get the publicity that they'd hoped for. And they thought, we can't just go home. And they decided to stay. So originally the camp was mixed. But it then very quickly became a women's peace camp for lots of reasons. Lots of women said it was because the men wouldn't wash up. But actually, I think what happened was men on men violence was what we were trying to avoid. And men were trying to defend their women folk that were being hurt. And women felt that that was distracting from the cause. So it became a women-only peace camp. And it was the first one. And it was a protest that lasted for 19 years. So the cruise missiles did go back and the land was returned to the common. I think that the thing for us was that we were in fear of our lives, and we felt that the only way to do this was to draw as much attention to this military base as possible. And a load of women not doing what their husbands had told them or their fathers had told them, and going off living in, with a whole load of other women who aren't supposed to do anything. It was quite radical at the time. It was like, what do you women think you're doing? How will you survive? But of course, we were women. So of course we survived perfectly
Of
well.
course.
And it was definitely for me an encouragement, because it was women only. And we were at that stage where fathers were still giving their daughters to men for marriage. And it was, the pressure was put on. And it was something that I knew wouldn't fit me. So going to live with a whole group of other women to protest against violence seemed like a perfect opportunity to celebrate my womanness, and also to explore my lesbian nature.
You were 18 when you went.
Yeah.
And you already at that point, understood about yourself that you weren't going to live a heteronormative life.
I was actually quite lucky. I was adopted by two white Christians who believed that actually you should be yourself. So I was never taught to be ashamed of myself. I was never taught to be anything other than who I was. I was always taught to be honest about it. So I have no coming out story, because I was always out.
So lucky to end up with the parents that you did.
I was extremely lucky. Extremely lucky.
So you get to Greenham.
I was going just for the weekend to see what it was like. And I got there, and straight away, women were quite dismissive and didn't really, sort of welcome us or anything like that. And then one woman came over and said, look, everybody's sick of visitors, blah, 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 and explained that it's quite stressful having visitor after visitor after visitor. But she got us a place to stay for the night, and I stayed in someone's bender and she stayed in the ambulance. And I decided the next day to go round and have a look round the base. And I literally got halfway between Yellowgate and Greengate, and there was this woman sat cross-legged on a piece of concrete that was sort of standing up slightly, looking at the soldier the other side of the fence. And she was telling him all about her life, and she was telling him all about how she had started drinking and hadn't realized what an effect that would have on her children. And she didn't realize that she was being violent and aggressive, and she hadn't realized. And I was thinking, what are you doing telling this soldier that? And he just lambasted her. He just said, wow, wicked and evil, and how horrendous she was. And she sat there, listened to him. And when he finished berating her, she went, yes, that's right. And violence is in all of us. Now, I've given up drink and I don't do violence anymore. And you can give up standing there protecting cruise missiles. You can choose to be non-violent too. And it was the way that she allowed him to berate her for all that time, and then talked quite calmly to him about violence is so easy, it creeps up on you. And, standing there defending nuclear weapons is just as violent as, picking up that drink. He's part of that process, and he needs to step away from it. And I was just in awe of the vulnerability that she gave to him there. And she just took his horrendous language and she agreed with it, and she accepted that was me. That was me. I was violent. That was awful. And now I'm going to stop it anytime I can see it. And she was amazing. And I just thought, I need to know what powers this woman. I need to know how you can get that inner strength to deal with your own nightmares, your own violence, the own thing inside you. And I think that was what encouraged me to stay at Greenham, because I wanted to explore that, because I hadn't thought about that. If you don't have control of your own violence, how are you going to deal with anybody else's? And so that was a bit of a lesson to me, because I hadn't really thought about it in terms of, I'm a peace woman, I'm not violent. But actually, there's violence in words, there's violence in lots of other things.
And so then you never left.
Well, I had to go home in order to get stuff and to sort out who was going to look after my pets and things like that. But yeah, I went home and I was back for days later, just days later. And I stayed for the 2 years.
Yeah. Did you ever participate in this sort of like convincing of the soldiers and the military, the way that the women would just be like unstoppably trying to convince them to quit their jobs, basically?
I
Like,
think, to be honest, I have witnessed it, but was it something I did? No, not particularly. A lot of the police had racial bias. And so my appearances were usually actions rather than anything else. Every Greenham woman did what came best to her. I was incredibly annoying and I could find ways of being incredibly annoying. And I loved rules because if you read them carefully, you can apply them. And sometimes they don't want you to apply those rules. And so my style was more about finding the gaps in their rules and rubbing it in their face.
can you also sort of break down what the situation was there, like the different camps, and specifically the process of evictions is like one of the craziest aspects of all of this to me.
Greenham itself was set up into lots of different camps. The main gate of the base itself became what we originally called Main Gate. Later on, it was changed to Yellow Gate because they decided to take on colours because it would take the status off the main gate. But the reality of it was the press went to the main gate, the visitors went to the main gate, most people went to the main gate, certainly initially. While I was there, we had Green Gate, which was away from the road, and it was the only gate where there were no men allowed, day or night. None. A lot of people used to call it the Cosmic Gate, but it was a really, if you were unwell, that was the gate to go. If you were a healer, that was the gate to live in. Then you had Blue Gate, which was the gate that was nearest the pub. So all the women that lived there were kind of the working class pubites.
How far away are the gates from each other? Like how long of a walk?
The whole base was 9 miles round. So the gates were quite spaced out. So you're talking about 2 or 3 miles between each gate. But Blue Gate was the one that was nearest the town. And so lots of us would just stay at Blue Gate for the night when we went to the pub. So that was quite nice. That was a sort of part of our entertainment. Then other gates like Orange Gate was the other side of Yellow, sort of heading away from Green. And that was more for women with children who would either visit or live with them, because that was another one that was off the beaten track. So it was far less dangerous.
Were you sleeping in tents? What was the
What
situation?
happened, which was quite unique at the time, is everybody lived in what we call benders when we first got there. Now, benders are bent over branches buried into the ground, both sides, and sort of strung together in the middle so that you're making a sort of dome construction. And then what we would do is we would put blankets over that, and then we would put plastic over the top of that. So it was waterproof, but it also kept it warm. Now we built moats around the outside. People had straw. We had bales of straw given to us. We had pallets that we put mattresses on. We had double beds inside them. We had our own sort of lighting systems with candles being in sort of jam jars suspended from the ceilings. So it was light, it was warm. It was, it was a good way of living, a lot better than a tent. A lot
But
better.
was it taken down every morning?
Well, initially, you see, there was no rule about camping on the common land. But then they passed a bylaw to make it illegal for you to camp. So then they sent the bailiffs in. Now, that was an unpleasant experience. They did one big main eviction. I'm going to say something like April 81 was when they had this big main eviction, and they came in and they leveled everything and they put in piles of dirt and rubble so that we couldn't rebuild there. They took everything. They were throwing women into custody. They took them all to Newbury Racecourse, where they held them for several hours. They took some to the police stations. They just cleared the place so they could clear our homes. I lived in an ambulance at the time. So by the time you got back, there was no ambulance, no anything. And that was when we started living in Gore-Texes, which were, the covers that we just put over our sleeping bags, and you just slept in it, because we couldn't put up tents because they would just literally come and evict every day, and sometimes more than once a day. Now, some of us took tents and went further into the woods, so actually slept away from camp. But other than that, you were in your Gore-Tex, and you had to get up before the bailiffs grabbed you and threw you into one of the munching machines, the bin lorries.
The muncher was what we called this evil, this big orange garbage truck.
This is Oak Chezar, an activist and author that also lived at Greenham, but a few years after Sue's time. Hopefully, we'll release her full interview sometime in the future, but for the purpose of this episode, I wanted to let Oak provide a little extra insight into some of Sue's stories, particularly as someone who experienced a different era of Greenham.
They would throw things in there and it would just grind up everything, passports, boots, whatever they took. When we would see the bailiffs and the police coming, we'd throw everything we could into whatever van there was. We had all these crapped out old vans at each gate. The cops and the bailiffs would descend, and then they would take everything that they could, and we would fight them for it. A lot of times we would either blockade the cops or blockade the muncher, keeping in mind that they wouldn't kill us. They would arrest us. They would beat us. I was dragged by my hair a bunch of times. I finally shaved my head because I just felt so vulnerable having something they could grab. But they would grab us all over our bodies. It was very violent. But they wouldn't open fire.
I'd already been there for several months with none of that. So it was good living before that. And then it became very difficult.
Actually luxurious in comparison.
Oh, yeah.
I can't imagine.
We built these homes, and they were homes. We'd got people had decorated them, painted them. They'd done a lot of effort in creating a home for us to live in because we were going to be there for a long time. We'd, sort of developed our own systems inside for storage boxes and containers to keep things dry. And, we'd built our own showers, we'd built toilets, we'd made a life for ourselves there. And so to suddenly have everything taken, but we were removed. So what you didn't have on you got evicted.
Every morning. I just need to emphasize every morning, and they rebuild every day. Completely insane.
We tried to, and eventually we just stayed in our Gore-Texes and people just didn't bother. You might put up a piece of plastic to cover, but most women just took to the trees because if you're sleeping under the trees, you're going to get less wet, you're going to get less disturbed. So, but nobody left camp. That was their goal, was to get us, to break us. They then made it illegal to build fires on the common. So they'd come round and squirt those out with fire extinguishers. That was also quite drastic for us. That was quite devastating because you'd get cold and wet because they'd bound to spray you with it on purpose. They'd spray the edge of the fire pit and the mud would come up and you'd be soaked and then no way of getting dry. So they knew what they were doing. They were just trying to wear us down. But frankly, we were women and we weren't going to be put up with being bullied anymore.
And when you say they, you mean the police?
The police, the military police came down with their fire extinguishers and squirted us. There was one day when we actually built a fire to lure them in so that we could throw water over them. Now, there was a big argument about it, whether water throwing was violence or not, and we decided it wasn't. So we went for it anyway. We were the young ones and we were forever getting told off by the older women. But we were, as far as we were concerned, if they could wet us with water and it's not violence, then we could wet them. So we lured them in with a big fire. A mate of mine and me, we just stepped out with this big washing up bowl full of all sorts of really not nice things, beef stew and beans. We'd washed all the tins in it and everything. But anyway, we threw it over the police after they'd soaked everybody. And it was great. Only they took it as the challenge, and they started chasing us with fire extinguishers, literally chasing us with the fire extinguishers and squirting us. That one of the funniest things we ever did at camp. And then, of course, they ran out of water, so they had to go back to the gate. But when they got to the gate, the new police officers that were about to take over said, "Oh no, you've got 10 more minutes," and they walked away laughing at them. But they left the fire extinguishers just inside the gates. We saw them. So, of course, I went to distract the police that were waiting a few feet away. And every woman grabbed hold of a fire extinguisher, and we had a full-on water fight with the police that day. It was very interesting. For a long time, it was funny. And then a policeman went a bit over the top and really hurt someone. So it didn't work out very well in the end.
Didn't they try to say that it was something much worse than beef stew that you were?
Yes, they told it. It was awful because I'd been saying in the morning when everyone said, "Oh, what about prison?" I'm going, "I am not going to prison. There's no way. I will pay the fine. I'm not going to prison. It's not safe in there. I'm not going." And in the evening, we got arrested, over the firing these fire extinguishers. In the morning, I was brought up and they in court, and they said it was excretia and urine. And I was remanded in custody. So I didn't have a choice to say no. We were held for 9 days when they suddenly identified, no, it was beef stew, and released us. It got me over my fear of prison. And it just made me a lot more of a nuisance than I ever would have been. Because, of course, I wasn't frightened of prison anymore. So if you're not frightened of prison, well, what action can I do now?
Yeah, it's very good that they ripped off the Band-Aid for you.
It was, yeah. I wouldn't have done that. I was too frightened of what I imagined society was locking away in jails. I imagined was this hideous, awful people. And when I went to jail, virtually every single woman was in there because she was poor and had done something not legal to correct that. Not violence, not the society's worst, as I thought. These were women who'd done a bit of social security fraud or had,
Right.
robbed the state of a few pennies or done some shoplifting or taken a milk bottle off of somebody's doorstep. This was just ridiculous what women were in prison for. It was shocking.
And then you and other Greenham women ended up organizing within the prison?
Well, the thing was about Greenham women is it was your job to be as annoying as possible and to push as many boundaries as possible.
Right. That's like the main purpose of being
Absolutely.
there.
Disrupt, cause problems, cost them money, cost them annoyance. We wanted them to think of Greenham women and think, oh my goodness, we don't want them. We don't want them. That's exactly what we wanted. If you want to send us to jail, we're going to be further annoying there. In jail, it's your responsibility to work. If they tell you to work, well, we weren't going to do that. And if they told us to do this or that, we weren't going to do that. And we'd go around helping prisoners. If prisoners had issues or complaints about things, we would make a fuss. We would do the demonstrating so that we were getting in trouble, not them, but we were highlighting the issues. There are certain things that they're not allowed to stop you from doing, and they would try and stop you from doing it. And so I would make a point of telling everybody that they could ask for things, and they would then ask for them. In those days, Tampaxes used to come with plain white cover coatings. They weren't plastic, they were paper. And the one thing that you could find in prison that you could find easier than anything else was drugs. So there was a lot of cannabis. There was a lot of cannabis smoked in jails. And one of the things that women needed was cigarette papers. But you were only allowed to buy so many packets of things because you only had so much money. And so people were forever running out of cigarette papers. And then we got onto the fact, and we were sort of sharing the fact that you could actually roll one with a Tampax wrapper. And so whenever Greenham women were in there, eventually everybody would be on a period and everybody would be asking for Tampaxes because they couldn't refuse you, and they would have to bring you as many as you asked for. And that's what women were doing, was taking them out the packets and using the packets to make
to
cannabis.
roll joints.
There was a couple of vegan women in there, a couple of vegan lesbians as it happened, and they weren't being given their products. They got them in their stuff, but they weren't letting them have it. So we went on a hunger strike. which I can tell you was not my idea. But we went on this hunger strike to make sure that they got what they needed. Took us 3 days, but they got what they needed. But it's like things like that. You can afford to do that when you're not stuck in there for years on end. You can afford to be a nuisance. We did all sorts of things. A friend of mine did a hilarious thing, as far as I'm concerned. We were all being taken out, and this guard was just being so foul. She wanted to check us every time we went through every door. So by the time we were getting outside for exercise, we had an hour, and it counted from when you left the cell, when you left your ward. That was it. It lasted until you got outside. So she'd take us like 40 minutes to get outside. So you were only getting like 10 minutes in the sun. So she loved to pat down all the women. So this friend of mine, she patted me down, and then she went to her, and every time she touched us, she went, "Oh, oh, oh, yes." And this woman's going, "That's disgusting. That's disgusting." And she was like, "Oh, go on, give it to me." And this guard was going absolutely crazy. And at one point, she put her arms and she looped them round the guard. She didn't touch the guard. She looped them round and went, "Oh, yes." And this guard that was it. She went through the quickest procedure of checking on everybody else down the line. But Stella, instead of just leaving it there, she went out of the line, went down to the far end. So when she got to the end, she was there and she went, "Yes, yes, me again." And this woman just lost it, lost the plot, started screaming and shouting, "Get them outside." So this other guard had to take us very quickly through all the gates straight outside. So we got 40 minutes that day. And then they decided to stop the searches in between.
Oh my God.
So it's things like that. It's being aware of what the women were suffering that we could actually make a difference and we could make a fuss about, really.
It's just so much about creativity and kind of like following your instincts, right? Every day it's like, does anyone have any ideas? What kinds of other creative actions were you part of? Like what
Well,
other
there are
things?
so many, because I mean, there are so many creative actions, but often the funniest things are the things that just happen. While they were holding us at Newbury Racecourse, we realised there were no locks on the window. They've locked the door, but there's no locks on the window. Well, that's an invite to a Greenham woman. So we all piled out the window and gave them a good run round the racecourse, with them chasing us all over the place. Because, I mean, we weren't going to go anywhere. It was just for the fun of it. So we do things like that.
Of course, Chezar has stories on stories of her own creative actions, which usually involved cutting through fences and vandalizing the base in some way.
We would spray paint the vehicles, sneak into the vehicle compound, and disable some of these machines. It was easy to let the air out of our tires. That was simple. But we would, a lot of times, and I love this, take instant mashed potatoes and just put them in the gas tank, or take ping pong balls and put them in the gas tank. And what ping pong balls do is, it looks fine. You start driving, the fuel or whatever the hell is happening in an engine, I really don't understand, pulls the ping pong ball down, it blocks something, and the vehicle stops. It stops. They turn it off, and the ping pong ball floats back up to the surface. So they could never figure out what the heck was happening to their vehicles. And of course, the instant mashed potatoes would mix with the fluids and just harden right up.
Somebody would start singing. Somebody would make up a line of a song, and then somebody would make up the next line. Before you knew it, we were all singing a new song that had been made up just then. And then you'd have other women who would go off and they'd make mini plays, or they'd make beautiful music together, or someone would pick up an instrument and start playing, and then other women would come along and start singing. Or, it was the movement of it all. Women would do sculptures. Women would decorate the gates. Women would decorate the ground. They would make entertainment of it, but also make statements out of it as well. So a lot of women spent a lot of time decorating the gates and decorating the fences with pictures of children, with beautiful, beautiful colours making up C&D symbols or, women's symbols or dyke symbols. And it was just lovely to see people did their own thing. They were creative in their own way. Some people believed in going around the country and talking to people and trying to encourage people to take action. Other people took part in what we had, which was the phone tree. So you didn't just have people who lived at camp. There were lots of women who couldn't live at camp because they had other commitments or they had other things that they needed to do, looking after elderly parents or whatever, or kids that were doing exams or whatever. So they couldn't do that. But what they could do was keep an eye out on the roads for when the crews actually did get out. And what we had was this phone tree. So one woman would say, hey, look, the convoy's actually got out. We blockaded, but it's got out. It's left down this road. And then they would phone all the people further down they'd phone like 3 or 4 people. And those 3 or 4 people would phone other people. And so you would have people looking out on the main roads for where the cruise was going.
When she says cruise, she just means cruise missile, like a bomb.
Because if it couldn't be kept quiet, then it was absolutely of no use to anyone. And so we kept it as loud and as public as we possibly could. And we had watchers, women watchers, who go out with their binoculars onto roads and, train tracks and all sorts of things to make sure that we could keep it in the news and keep advertising where it was. Because if you advertise where it is, it becomes pointless.
Do you feel like you all ended up successfully impacting public opinion about nuclear war and what was going on?
I think we did, because there are so many different ways of evidencing that. When we started, nobody was on our side. We were just a group of dirty lesbians in a field in the middle of Berkshire, and no one could understand what on earth was doing and why the police were just arresting us. And then we ended up having the support of the Quakers, having the support of CND.
CND is a British activist group. It stands for Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament.
That made a big difference when you have organisations like that are backing you, because then what happened was CND groups started campaigning with us. So started raising awareness, but also recognising that we were pushing the campaign forward in a very open way. So lots of groups made us soups and brought us soups and foods, and if we needed things, we just put a call out, and loads of those groups, the Quakers and CND, would get people to rally round and get us what we needed. It was absolutely incredible how people worked together. It's like, because it was part of, during the miners' dispute, the miners came down and brought us coal. Basically, Margaret Thatcher and the Tories were pushing for more money for them and less money for workers, and they were shutting mines that were still making money, but because it didn't make them enough money, and that was cutting jobs. And they were cutting jobs where safety was concerned for the miners as well. There was lots of things that they were doing, but they were basically, the miners went out on strike and then we're not going to do it anymore then. And so this was a big thing about, the unions against the government. And we supported wholeheartedly anyone against the government back then, because the government was being so oppressive. And so for us, we were supporting the miners, and we sent women to some of their pickets and helped to picket their picket lines, type of thing, keep them safe. And they came and dropped us coal off, which was just really lovely.
That's cool.
So it was kind of like united in our struggles, which was really cool. But we had a lot of experiences that were like that, of people coming from the outside who truly understood. And we had lots of people coming just to get the publicity shots. That's probably decided what sort of people stayed at what sort of gates. I stayed at main gate that became Yellow Gate. I loved it there. I loved it because it wasn't quiet. I loved it because there were always visitors. There was always somebody different to talk to. And I enjoyed that. Lots of women were sick to death of telling visitors where we went to the loo, because that was the questions. There were some set questions. Nobody wanted to know about the peace movement. They wanted to know, how could these women survive on their own without men? Very easily, thank you.
Have you heard of Olivia, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ+ women? You know what they say. Life is short and the world is wide, and when you're a lesbian or LGBTQ+ woman, you want to be able to go on vacation, have some fun, and be yourself. Olivia Travel creates full takeovers of their cruise, resort, riverboat, and adventure vacations, so you can relax and be completely yourself. Olivia also provides the entertainment, bringing comedians and musicians from within our community. Traveling by yourself? No problem. Olivia has a robust solos program so you can travel independently, together. Single, coupled, or in a group, you'll meet amazing LGBTQ+ women who come from all walks of life yet have so much in common. Join the thousands of Olivians who travel to bucket list destinations all over the world. It's life-changing to be in the majority on your own vacation. Discover Olivia for yourself at olivia.com today.
There are many ways to entice a potential new customer with flashy branding and calculated marketing strategies. But at the end of the day, the success of a business comes down to the ability to close the sale. And for businesses like Thrive Cosmetics, Allbirds, or Skims, it's what goes on behind the scenes, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple, that makes the difference. For them and for millions of businesses, that difference is made with Shopify. Businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Because if your goal is growth, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And Shopify will make sure you're ready. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And with Shop Pay, they boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. It's no wonder Shopify is home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/realm. I love a multi-use beauty product, like an eye/cheek/lipstick. It makes a full face so much easier, plus you only need to bring one product along for touch-ups. And whether you're all about simple mascara and gloss, or you love to play with bold shapes and colors, you gotta have that trusty favorite you turn to for every look. Thrive Cosmetics makes certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free products you can depend on for everything from simple daily wear to show-stopping self-expression. And it's all made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, high-performance and trademarked formulas, and uncompromising standards. And Thrive Cosmetics is beauty that gives back. For every product purchased, they make a donation towards 8 major causes, including social justice organizations and those impacted by cancer and homelessness. It feels good knowing that when I purchase a product, I'm also able to give back to causes that matter to me. And one product I love from Thrive Cosmetics is the Brilliant Eye Brightener. Like I said, I love a product that can have multiple uses, and the Brilliant Eye Brightener is just that. It's an eyeshadow and highlighter stick that's super blendable, and I'm slowly but surely stocking up on the 31 shades that it comes in. Try your new trusty favorites with an exclusive set for our listeners. New customers can get the Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara and a mini-sized Brilliant Eye Brightener at a special set price with free shipping available at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. Or save more with 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
This episode is brought to you by the Toyota Grand Highlander. From daily routines to life-changing adventures, the Toyota Grand Highlander is spacious, powerful, and ready to take on life's grand challenges. Advanced safety features and innovative technology give you confidence for whatever life throws at you. And it's available in a hybrid Nightshade Special Edition, which includes sophisticated gloss black exterior accents and 20-inch black alloy wheels. Learn more at toyota.com/Grand Highlander. Toyota, let's go places.
Spring is here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
I'm curious how lesbian everything was there.
Um, well, that's an interesting one. I would say you couldn't get any more lesbian if you tried, really. It was accepted. So therefore it was norm, and everybody knew it was just women that were there. So you'd get a flood of lesbians heading there because it was difficult to be a lesbian in that time, and you didn't meet lesbians, and there'd be you and somebody else in a village or something. You just didn't have an open population, and there it was being politically active, because we weren't just protesting about nuclear weapons. We were protesting about men making decisions for women. And that never works well for a lesbian.
If you could guess what portion of Greenham women were queer, what would you say?
I can't talk to other times. I can only talk to the 2 years that I was there. And I'd say in those 2 years, I would say it was probably 80-20.
80% lesbian.
80% lesbian, yeah.
That's awesome.
I would say it probably might have been more than that. I am being quite, cautious with that.
And I'm sure some people came around while they were there.
There were lots of women who went there to explore who they were. That's what happens if you suddenly realise there's lesbians at a community. All the press did was whores, hags and lesbians. That's what they advertised us as. So actually, lots of lesbians went, oh, there might be some lesbians there. I might be able to get to meet lesbians, or I might be able to get to explore whether I am a lesbian. We were very much suppressed then. It really was a kind of if a man spoke, he'd be listened to. If a woman spoke, it'd be like, where's your man? Why hasn't her man shut her up? Women couldn't be independent. There was no money. If you needed to leave your husband, you needed to have a rich mum and dad, or you were in trouble. It was very, very stacked against us. And I think, it was natural that lesbians would go to Greenham, but it was a massive percentage.
Was there a lot of romance?
There were relationships everywhere. It's like a small village.
Right.
You're in a small village. What are you going to do? You're going to start pairing up in your small village. And there were lots of pairing ups in our village.
Yeah. Was there drama around it?
Oh, there was so much drama because women were really honest. Women like to talk about things. I had my first opportunity to think, this is none of my business, when I was sitting at a meeting where people decided that they would have a discussion about somebody's non-monogamous relationship. Now, I'd never even heard of a non-monogamous relationship. So here we are around the fire, and everybody is discussing how awful it is for this one person who clearly wasn't happy in it, but wasn't talking to the other people in that relationship, but was talking to other people outside of it. And everybody got dragged in. And they actually had a meeting to discuss it, which I went to go, this is none of our business. We were trying to explore who we were whilst trying to find some standards amongst ourselves without telling other people what to do. And that's quite hard.
Yeah. Can you talk about the concept of separatism? Do you identify with that? What did that kind of mean to everyone at the time?
I think at the time, you've got to bear in mind the history of it was that men were the aggressors, and we were trying to show peaceful demonstration in amongst that. We'd gone because we weren't these conventional sit at home, look after the husband, have 2.4 to 5 children. We weren't that. But we didn't know what we were. We're Dutch women and a Japanese woman and an American woman and, Czech women and, Norwegian and Swiss and Swedish and British and Scottish. We had so many people come together, and suddenly the door to what woman could be was opened. Because until you start seeing all these different women who all had chosen not to be these adjuncts of men, it kind of opened up a whole world to me that I'd never seen. We didn't have the internet. You couldn't push a button and see where somebody was or what their lifestyle was or what their country looked like. You couldn't do any of that. You were just told what that was in the press and the media. So unless somebody'd written a book, there wasn't the same access. So Greenham was the place that women went to find out about themselves, and lesbians went to explore themselves. And there was a lot of exploring went on. I can't deny it. A lot of exploring went on.
But specifically the concept of separatism. Some women specifically identified that way and like lived
Yes.
their life that way outside of Greenham even.
See, my problem, okay, I'll start by saying I'm not a separatist. I went on a talk with a separatist and I traveled with a separatist, and I would honestly say that since that day, I've never done that again. I found it extremely challenging because the world, whether we like it or not, is absolutely infused with men. So there are going to be men everywhere, men taxi drivers. She wouldn't get in the taxi. It was a nightmare for me because I could keep men as a separate entity. Okay, you're driving me in a car. I'm not sitting talking to you. You're driving me in a car. I can be polite to you. I can say, I didn't have those issues, but these women were making very clear decisions. Do I blame them? No. Do I understand them? Yes. I understand exactly where they're coming from. So this is not a criticism. It is just, it wasn't for me. And I find it difficult to work out how they managed. At Greenham, great, marvellous, because other women could go to shops, other women could go and get supplies and things like that, because everything was men back then. There weren't women in every shop, and there weren't women in every trade. It was prohibited. That's a man's job. So no, we didn't particularly want men there, but we did recognise that people had male company that they might want to visit them, their fathers, their brothers, and so male visitors were allowed at most gates during the day. There were one or two gates they weren't welcome ever, but that was the whole point. You went and lived at a gate. If you didn't like the rules there, go live at another gate and make your own. My dad thought it was marvellous that I was doing something like that. He was fully supportive of that. So I wasn't prepared to turn my back on my father, who was being supportive to me. He'd come, bring some sandwiches and some soup and some biscuits and a jumper, and then he'd go. He'd ask if anything was needed, and he'd go back and ask the group to get it for next time. And he'd take other people to visit, or sometimes to do night watch. He'd bring a couple of women who would sit there overnight and do night watch, and then he'd come and collect them in the morning. He'd do things like that.
That's really cool.
Lots of people supported Greenham women. It wasn't just women that were involved. There were a lot of supportive husbands who had their kids. Back then, that was unheard of. The fathers looked after them and put them in school, and brought them to visit at the weekend. And I suppose those kinds of forward thinkers didn't have the same problem with lesbians that society seemed to at that time.
Right. I think the idea of separatism today, while it's sort of like coming back up with everything going on politically,
Yeah.
I think it's also inherently associated with transphobia and being trans exclusionary. And I'm wondering if you saw any of that, if there were trans people at all involved in Greenham, which I'm assuming there weren't, but
No.
I don't.
I
Yeah.
mean, the problem with this question is I really don't have any experience of that. Our fight back there was a plain and simple one. If you were a woman, you were expected to marry a man, and you were expected to produce children. You were not expected to work. That was not your job. That was not your role in life. And I think that for a lot of young women, that was what it was. It was like, we don't want the life you're telling us is ours. It's not our life. That's what you want us to have. And we don't want that. And so our fight was a straightforward. We want to be a different kind of woman. We're not the kind of woman that you can bully into a corner and tell her when she has children. We wanted to say no to that lifestyle.
Transness was not really a conversation.
It really wasn't. It was a straightforward kind of fight, women's peace against men's violence. And that was the fight. Why can they not just understand the other person's doing something wrong by hitting you? You don't have to join in. If you do, you're doing the same wrong thing. If we'd have fought back, we'd have been doing the same wrong thing. We were trying to show them there is a peaceful way of doing this. And no matter what they did to us, we remained peaceful.
Right. How were things run? Like, was it completely non-hierarchical? Did people have certain roles?
It was completely non-hierarchical. The whole idea was that we were all Greenham women, and other than the rules of non-violence, because that was the rule, non-violence, that was it. You did what you felt was right for your conscience. If you didn't felt it was right to go to prison and you felt you should pay the fine, then that's what you should do. If you felt it was right to break into the military base, then you do that. And if I think it's not, and I'm going to sit around this fire in my, silent protest here, that's okay too. So because it was like that, it was very anarchistic. You would not know what somebody who lived in the next bender was doing. Unless you happened to be round the fire, you wouldn't hear what actions were going on. And sometimes that didn't work out well. It's like we went in and spray painted a barracks, but we didn't know that women were going in when the barracks was empty and doing their washing. Had we known they were doing that, we wouldn't have touched the barracks. But that's what happens when you live in that kind of anarchy sort of setup, is that you do what you want when you want. And people did whatever actions they wanted to do. There were some big mass actions that were brilliant. For an example, I suppose the most famous one is when everybody surrounded the base, and it was called Embrace the Base. It was a call for 10,000 women. It's generally accepted that there were 30,000 women, but that is the government estimate of how many women there were there. We went around the 9 Mile base, and at some points there were 7 or 8 rows deep. It was one of the most amazing protests of women, and it was designed so that everybody go arm in arm round the base and then turn their back on it. The idea was to turn your back on all that negativity and turn your back on all that negative energy. And it was amazing. Nobody thought it would be as good as it was. It was 1,000 leaflets sent out. 1,000 leaflets sent out to people. That was it. And those got that many people. There were coaches for miles and miles, coaches and cars and vans and everything. It was amazing. And so few police, because they hadn't thought it would be that successful, and it was incredible. They were completely overwhelmed and they had to take a back seat all day. Unfortunately for us, we had Embrace the Base Sunday, and then it was Close the Base Monday, and we were going to blockade every gate. But then they shipped in hundreds of police from elsewhere, and they basically used this as an excuse to beat the hell out of us. And it was a horrendous day, a horrendous day. And it was really quite frightening, and a lot of people bled for the cause that day. It was really sad because they were so angry about the day before, which there are still iconic pictures of women standing with their backs to the fence. And that's what it was about. I have no idea whose idea it was, but hats off to them. It was sensational.
Did you experience the zapping at all?
Right now, this is really weird. And if I hadn't been there, I would have said, no, I don't believe that. We reckon that they were sending out waves of some sort that made you upset, distressed, or tired. We all got up. I had a coffee, and then I don't remember anything until I woke up several hours later. Nobody does. Everybody that was there that day cannot remember anything. It was the weirdest thing. I think there was only one woman, and we used to call her Metal Carol. She had an affinity with metal, and she just wore metal through every single part of her skin. But Metal Carol was the only person who stayed awake. Everybody else fell asleep. They did something to us that day. They had to have done.
Do you think that's because of the metal in some way, like was protecting her from the zapping?
I don't know. I really don't know. I would assume so.
Yeah.
I would assume so, because it's a bit weird she was the only one that wasn't affected. But this is a whole gate of people. This is not, 10 people. We all think that they did something to our brains, but we just, do you know what I mean? It sounds insane when you say it. It's like all these conspiratorial stuff. But who goes to sleep after coffee?
I am so curious if this is going to sound insane and conspiratorial to other people, but for me, having already spoken to Oak about this and to Michelle Crone about the exact same thing happening at the Seneca Women's Peace Encampment in the U.S., it doesn't sound far-fetched to me at all. I do think the zapping became a lot harder to ignore as the years went on at Greenham, and that's actually the biggest thing I wanted to make sure I had Oak speak on, because her experiences with zapping a few years later were much more intense and consistent than Sue describes, and the Greenham women then would eventually gain a better understanding of what was actually going on.
Zapping is an electronic weapon that had been used for over 50 years by the military of the United States and the Soviet Union. And women would get super sick. They would get pain in their head. They would get incredible fear and paranoia. They would get hot. For some women, it just felt like walking through a solid wall of energy. It would really affect your vision, and it would be like the air was like tweed, patterns in the air, fractals in the air. The electronic weapons that zapping is related to are the next field after atomic weapons. They're called auto technology, and they're electromagnetic radiation. So fluorescent lights and strobe lights and radio waves, they all cause zapping to a very small degree, and power lines and satellite transmissions, they all alter your emotions if you're caught in their signals. And they have been proven to change your brainwave patterns and affect your emotions. So we just knew that we felt really sick. And I remember one day, two women woke up in their tents at two different parts of the camp, and they were sunburned. Like their skin was so hot that you could feel it from like 3 inches above their skin. You could feel the heat radiating, and it had been raining for months. Like I don't think the sun ever came out. And so we got really scared. And we contacted this woman, Rosalie Bertel, who was a pediatrician from Canada, and she was a nun. And she had spent her whole career studying children who had cancer from living near nuclear power plants and nuclear bomb factories. So we wrote to her and said, hey, this thing is going on. And she came. And she came with a whole bunch of assistants, and they had sensors and different equipment that they set up all around the base, and they measured these completely invisible beams that were hurting us. So we had pictures of the cops when the convoy was coming out holding what looked like small megaphones. And she said those were called phodic drivers, like photon. And what she told us was that they can disperse that beam of electromagnetic radiation to cover a wide area and make everyone feel vaguely sick, or they could focus it on one person, like the perceived leader of a protest, and they could blow that person's heart right up. Like they could give them a heart attack. And so we were like guinea pigs to them, that they could experiment on us with this shit. Because we never left. We were always there, and they could watch us and listen to us talking. They had directional microphones in the trees in the forest, and they could hear everything we were saying. And so they could just sort of chart the actions and reactions that these weapons were doing to us. So we were like rats in a cage, I guess. And what Rosalie Bertel said at the end is, these will cause cancer eventually, and they settle in your soft tissues and organs. The zapping settles in your soft tissues and your organs, and that for women, those are mostly reproductive organs that are being. So, like, I didn't get my period for 5 months when I lived at Greenham, and there were women who were in their 70s and 80s. They came to protest, and they got their periods again, like they hadn't bled for 20 years. So it was affecting definitely our reproductive organs, I would say. We would say, we're not going to leave. If we leave, they win. And then other people would say, but if you die, they win. And so the women that were most diehard would be like, it's not safe anywhere. It's dangerous here, but it's no less dangerous out there, where you could be raped or beaten or get cancer anyway, because we live in a toxic terrarium. So why would we give up this extremely important movement? So it was really hard. I finally did leave after 3.5 years because I was so sick. I was so sick from the zapping.
And so it affected some people worse than others, and that kind of would dictate if you were able to
Yes.
stay.
Some women would say that they didn't feel anything, and we shouldn't even talk about it because it was taking the focus off of nuclear weapons, and that's why we were there. But a lot of women talked about it to the media, to visitors, to anybody who would listen.
They just got better at it. They tried different things. I think we were the experimental ground for things.
How common was police brutality?
Well, we have to be quite specific here. You have police, and then you have military police. And so I want to be quite clear. We mostly dealt with military police until we went to the police stations. So I would say that generally speaking, the Ministry of Defence police thought that it was much better to intimidate you by stripping your clothes off you than they thought it was by beating you up. For humiliation purposes, that was what they did. So it was less beating you up and more of that. Generally speaking, if they were local police, you were quite lucky. But if they were from anywhere else, you were in trouble. The violence was absolutely hideous. Women were constantly being hurt. Women were thrown, there was an incident that I was there just to witness, and I ended up getting dragged into it when Sarah Hipperson was in court, and she'd been a magistrate, and she was saying, you can't do this. And they picked her up and threw her down a stone flight of stairs. And at the time, she was like 56, 57 at the time. I can remember thinking, what a hero. I mean, what an amazing woman she was. But the way they treated her was appalling. And that violence, I got caught up in that. I just realised I didn't want to go head first down these stairs. So I wrapped myself round the policeman's leg and I went, I go, you go. And so he couldn't push me down the stairs. He had to carefully walk down the stairs with me wrapped round his leg.
Oh my God.
Until he got to the bottom stairs. And as soon as he got to the bottom stairs, I knew he couldn't push me down the stairs. I let go of him and he just punched me in the face. So, and I was not treated as badly as some women by a long way,
Were there other people of color?
I mean, while I was there was only one person of
Wow.
colour that was there with me at Yellowgate. There were women came at other gates in different places, but you didn't necessarily know them. I loved my gate and I spent a lot of time there. So we went and did an action. Now, one, we were very rude. We didn't ask the women at the gate that we went to if we could do an action at their home, but we did one anyway, which was a bit rude. But one of the police officers during it put a big torch, a big proper, really bright spotlight, put it on us and said, can you identify any of them? And this woman says, oh, I don't know who that is, but that's the big fat from Maingate. This was how she referred to me. Well, as soon as she referred to me then all the women that had been annoyed at us for doing an action were suddenly really annoyed with her instead. What we decided to do was that we'd cut in at this gate. Well, this gate was actually a locked-in gate, so they couldn't get out to get to us. So we basically cut the fence down while they panicked behind the gate, which was really funny. We just started cutting away, spray painting the poles, and it ended up with the policeman grabbing hold of the bolt cutters, but he's got between razor wire and barbed wire, so I had to let them go really slowly so he didn't get hurt. They had to drive round the base to come and get us, but we did get arrested. Now I'm going to jump to the next part, which was we were in court for this particular case. And the night before, Stella had phoned me up and said, oh, do me a favour, go and pick me up some Moroccan. And I went, but that's halfway across the city to go and get you some Moroccan. She went, go and get me some Moroccan. So I went and got it. Do you call it resin? Yeah. Cannabis.
You've spoke about Stella. Can you describe her? What is she like? We need to get a good picture.
Stella was a Rochdalian who was what we used to call proper grassroots liberal. Yeah. Quite politically motivated. She was 28 and I was 18. And we became really good friends. Later on, we had a family together. So we have children together, but we were not together at camp, but we got together in 84. So after camp, but that was only because she kept saying no. But anyway, I just had to keep chasing her. Regardless of that, what happened was, so I'd gone over, got a block of Moroccan, I'd put it in my pocket. We'd gone to where we were supposed to be staying in Newbury the night before. And the people that we were staying with had a big argument. And so we sat on the doorstep until 4 o'clock when we finally crashed out. We woke up at like 10 to 9. We were supposed to be in court at 9. So we had to run all the way to the court. Now, I've forgotten that I've got this cannabis resin in my pocket. I've forgotten. And we're in this court and we're arguing about, what had happened that night, and we're defending ourselves. And Stella just turns round to me and she went, "You didn't bring that thing for me, did you?" And I went, "Yes, I did. So we're in the dock. We're going to go to jail, so they will empty our pockets. That's what will happen. But we were in the dock, so they're not going to check our pockets in the dock." So she's looking at me and she said, "All right, hold on a minute." And she got out an opal fruit, which I think you now call Starbursts. Yeah, it's a sort of like a chewy fruit sweet. But anyway, it's sort of got a little tiny sort of rectangular packet to it.
That's very Starburst, yeah.
She ate one and she's got the wrapper and they came running over to the dock. "What have you got?" And she sort of said, "Oh, I've got a really sore throat." Now she was white. So she said to the magistrate, "I've got a really sore throat." And he went, no, it's okay. She can have the opal fruits. So she gave me the wrapper. So I had to wiggle this cannabis resin, this block of it out of my pocket. And I'm looking at this wrapper thinking, it's not going to go in this wrapper. It's not going in this wrapper. But I put the wrapper on it. The wrapper went about halfway up the side of it. It was a big block. It looks like licorice, a block of licorice. That's what it looks like.
Okay.
It's hard. It's hard and very difficult to chew.
Okay.
Very difficult to chew. You need to know that, I suppose, because it's really difficult to chew.
And you're supposed to smoke it, but
you're supposed to burn it, crumble it into a cig with tobacco and smoke it.
you can obviously
you
still
can
get
eat
high from eating it.
Oh, yes, you will definitely get high
This
from
is
eating
new
it.
to me.
Not straight away, about 40 minutes later, which is also an interesting thing when you're in court. But anyway, it was either me or Stella. And I thought, nah, I'm not having that. So I passed it to Stella. She put it in her mouth in one go because she had no choice. That's the first point at which she realized how big it was. Right. Now, if I'd have been eating it, I would have eaten maybe an eighth of what she had. And that would have got me nicely stoned.
Yeah.
But she ate the whole of it. Right. So she's chewing away and drinking water because it's so not the sort of thing that you eat.
And probably tastes insanely bad, right?
It's not great. It's not great. But to have to chew it is not great either. But anyway, she kept drinking cups of water and cups of water and cups of water, and she drank it. Then she started to slide in the dock. So she started to realize that she was really stoned, but you don't realize you're really stoned. You just start sliding this way like this. So I'm trying to push her up, to push her back up straight in the dock. We managed to get onto something that made the police look very silly because they just lie about the most stupid things, but they lied about the size of what they were standing on. It was a great big platform, and then they were saying, "Oh, it was only 3 foot by 5 foot," and it was just silly. This box just kept changing size, so we were making the most of that, saying, "Oh, what was this size of this magical mystery box?" We were saying all this kind of stuff. And then we got to the point with the policewoman and we mentioned about, the words big fat coming from her mouth. And she was like, no, as she went absolutely scarlet. And then you could see Stella was starting to dip. She was starting to get to that point where it had hit her system and she could not stay up straight. She couldn't talk anymore. So I had to take over the interrogations.
You're representing yourselves also, right?
Yes, we were representing ourselves, yeah. The end of the court didn't work out well. We both had identical cases. We were doing the same offence at the time. And I got 28 days and she got 14 for the same offence. So she did this sort of justice speech about, democracy and how unfair it was. It was everything. How can we, after we heard these foul words of big fat from Maingate and we hear this abuse and this racial abuse, how can you be so unjust as to sentence her to more than me? That's absolutely disgraceful. And she'd gone on and on about this. And then she blew the last line and said, they should give her 28 days as well, instead of saying, give me 14. So they said no. She went to jail for 14. I went to jail for 28.
Ridiculous.
For the same offence, committed at the same time with the same history of convictions. That was just how it was.
And so this is totally separate from then you end up taking the police to court over strip searching.
Yeah, strip searching, the thing with strip searching is that the police used to use it as a tactic to push women down. It was the working class women, me, it was not the middle class white women that were getting strip searched. It really was anyone who looked like a lesbian. It was a tactic to put us down in the hope that we'd run away. And what happened was we got in touch with the solicitors, Seaford, Sedley and Williams, and they decided that the best person to push forward actually as the case, although they took a lot of statements from lots of us, they decided that Stella's was the best one because Stella was actually married and married to a man. And so that would make her case look better. Now, this was after Greenham because Stella had to marry a man in order to keep her children because the father of one of her children took her to court for being a lesbian. And back then, that was deemed as inappropriate to have around children. But because she married a man, the courts allowed her to keep her children. Lovely marriage of convenience, but that was what actually happened with her. But because of that, because she was married then after she left, it was better that she take the case. All of us who'd been strip searched were all interviewed, but they always have a lead case, and the lead case is the one that you can win. And you can't win against a lesbian because nobody cared. So you've abused a lesbian, no one cares. You've abused a black one, no one cares. But abusing a white married woman, that was always going to hurt them because society was not happy about a married woman being interfered with by the police. And so the case was taken. But we actually had an ex-policewoman who said that strip searching and personal searches were exactly the same thing. They just left you stood in your socks.
Because they would call it personal searches.
They called them personal searches to get away from the fact that they were illegally doing strip searches. Now, Stella's case was taken. The first time the judge died during the middle of the case. So it waited, we were quite twisted. We were joking, was he run over by a tank? But there was lots of mystery around how he died because we were told he was involved in a car accident and then they phoned up and said he died of a heart attack. So we were laughing, saying that perhaps a tank had got him. But, he was
That's
about...
totally possible, right?
Well, to be honest, he was just about to award against and he told them, make an offer because I will be awarding against you. And they'd made all sorts of offers to Stella and Stella was like, no, because in order to change history, to change the law in this country, you have to have the precedent, which means you have to have a court case. They were saying, we'll give you lots of money instead of you doing the court case. And she's like, no.
And the judge died.
They offered her anything. They said, give us anything. But the judge died. And so we had to start the case again. And that took another couple of years to get it into court. It got in the end in 85. They found against the Ministry of Defence Police, which meant that they could no longer strip search or personal search at customs, police stations and military bases. We then helped Seaford Sedley go and collect evidence from people who'd had the same experience visiting their relatives in jail. We actually came to Liverpool and took statements of people who'd had a really raw deal with them, strip searching grandma's wooden leg, for example. There were a lot of abuses that were going on, but because of the change of history, because Stella's case won, the Ministry of Defence couldn't do it anymore.
So there were huge reforms after.
It opened the floodgates to all the different cases from courts and from military establishments and from prisons. It opened the floodgates. So there were lots of cases taken against the prisons department and stuff like that, because you can't do that. You can't intimidate people by strip searching their relatives. That's out of order.
That's insane. I feel so sure that the judge was killed. Do you remember his name?
I honestly cannot remember his name.
I want to look into this.
But,
That's crazy.
But by all means, you will see that the first judge died.
Yeah. And so then you never go back to living there. And do you know about what ends up happening to the Common, like when things disbanded and what the space ended up turning into?
I mean, basically, when the cruise missiles went back to America, women decided to stay on because the agreement was always that women would fight for the land because the land was always common land. Now, in England, common land is for everybody to walk on anytime you want. It's for you. It's for everyone. And so common land is really, really important because councils have been selling things and building on things, but this is the land that you get to walk on, and it's beautiful and it's full of wildlife. And for years after the nuclear weapons went, they wouldn't give the land back. It was still a military base, which it never should have been. And so women stayed until it was returned to basically a nature reserve. And that's what it is now. Lots of the fencing is still there. Lots of it is still fenced off, but it's fenced off differently so that you can access it. People actually graze their cattle on it and put horses on it because that's what you can do on common land. You're allowed to. You're allowed to walk across it and spend your afternoon having picnics on it. And so women stayed until that was able to happen, which I think was really good. Greenham started off being about nuclear weapons, but what it was really about was about women saying no. No, men are not going to lead the way. No, men are not going to control our actions. And yes, we're going to take responsibility for the way that our world becomes. And we're going to open our mouths and say, no, not this time.
Thank you to our sponsor, Olivia Travel, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ+ women. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover our podcast. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. You can find us on social media at CruisingPod and on the web at www.cruisingpod.com. Support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod.
Can you actually change your personality if you want to? How does peer pressure work, and why is it so powerful? Should you ever really trust your gut when you make a big decision? These are just a few of the topics we've recently covered on my podcast, Something You Should Know. I'm the host, Mike Carruthers, and each episode of Something You Should Know covers multiple topics that are likely relevant to you. You'll discover things you can use in your life today, right now, like how to have a great conversation, how to be more courageous, the anatomy of the perfect apology, and much, much more. To date, there are over 1,000 episodes of Something You Should Know, and we've gotten over 4,000 mostly 5-star reviews. I invite you to check out Something You Should Know. Look for the bright yellow light bulb on the blue background. Something You Should Know, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have you ever heard about the 19th century French actress with so many lovers that they formed a lovers' union? Or what about the Aboriginal Australian bandit who faked going into labor just to escape the police, which she did escape from them. It was a great plan. How about the French queen who murdered her rival with poison gloves? I'm Ann Foster, host of the feminist women's history comedy podcast, Vulgar History. Every week I share the saga of a woman from history whose story you probably didn't already know, and you will never forget after you hear it. Sometimes we re-examine well-known people like Cleopatra or Pocahontas, sharing the truth behind their legends. Sometimes we look at the scandalous women you'll never find in a history textbook. Listen to Vulgar History wherever you get podcasts. And if you're curious, the people I was talking about before, the Australian woman is named Marianne Bugg, and the French actress was named Rochelle, no last name, just Rochelle. And the queen who poisoned her rival is Catherine de' Medici. I have episodes about all of them.